Hello, and welcome to this training webinar from Technovus titled Maximizing Your Crystalline. I am Dr. Thomas Kendall, Senior Application Specialist from Technovus. This webinar is aimed at Crystalline version 2 users who want to make the most out of their instrument's capabilities, as well as any Crystalline version 1 users or non-users who want to understand the benefits the version 2 can bring to their research. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you after the session. There is also a Q&A session at the end of the talk, but if you have any further questions, please send them to info@crystallizationsystems.com. So the contents of this webinar will be initially how to program an experiment, and this will consist of an in-software demonstration showing you how to program a crystallization experiment. The second step will be how to use the cameras. This will be done through slides showing you the factors and settings that can be altered in order to obtain the optimal images of your particles. Next will be measuring solubility. This will be done through an in-software demonstration, showing you how to process data that you have collected on your crystalline in order to get solubility and metastable zone information. Fourth will be advanced analysis. So this will be in-software demonstration on how to, as well as some slides on how to process data in order to get particle size and shape information. And then ending on the question and answer session. So programming an experiment. At the start, I want to just highlight checking that you have the latest version of the software. This is the version 2.3.5.6356. And this will ensure that you have that you are removing any bugs or potential crashes in previous versions of the software. This can be done outlined in the slide, but by going through crystallizationsystems.com, going to the menu and logging in, and then downloading the latest version. If you do not have an account, you can request one by sending an email to support@crystallizationsystems.com. So once you're in the software, the first thing to check is that the instrument is connected, and this you'll see is a green tick in this connections button. I'm disconnected because I am doing this remotely. So we can click New Crystalline Experiment. Within here, we can fill out details, and these are more for traceability of the experiment. So we can call this a demo. Any username you want to have tracked, any description. So this could be a batch number or product item number. If you wish to use the imaging and the advanced analysis for particle size analysis, you need to make sure that the particle viewer, image analysis, and advanced image analysis are all ticked to 1. Here we can select our cap type, and most of these again are just for traceability, except for the evaporation cap, which will bring up the option for evaporation gas, and in the program an option to turn on the evaporation of gas through the valve. The basic cap is for bottom stirring, and the standard cap is for overhead stirring. So we can input our compound name, the solvent, the concentration, and then which stirrer was used. Again, this is more for traceability. This doesn't change the function of the instrument itself. And it is possible to have both top and bottom stirrers moving active at the same time. Once we've gone to the details step, we can move to program. And here we can construct an experiment for a cooling crystallization as an example. So the experiment is built by using tiles, and the start tile is the only tile that cannot be removed. So initially we can set our stir speed, and then this will carry on throughout the entire experiment, so I don't have to keep inputting a stir speed. Anywhere between 800 and 1150 RPM will be sufficient in most cases to suspend solids. The image interval is how often an image is saved. So in this case, it's an image every 5 seconds will be saved. This can be changed in every tile. However, it is important to note that if you're taking an image every second and you have a very long experiment, the data file will become very large and therefore might take a long time to process or open in in the software. Initially, we want to add a prompt. We're going to call this one camera. What this will do is pause the experiment once this tile is reached with a prompt to say continue and the message camera. And it is at this moment we would go into the program in the Run and Results tab, and we would change the camera settings in order to ensure optimal detection of our particles. And I'll explain this in the coming slides. Next, we want to add a linear ramp, and we can go up to our dissolution temperature. This needs to be, the highest you can go is really about 5 degrees C below the boiling point of your solvent. That's to avoid any buildup of unnecessary pressure. So in this case, I'm only going to go up to 60. Since I'm dissolving my material, I'm not really interested in how the particles are dissolving. So I'm going to go quite fast. And my image capture rate, I will increase to an image every minute. Next, we want to add a hold. This is this linear line, horizontal. And then we need to insert the time we want to have this for. So if we type 1H, that will do 1 hour. If we do 1M, that will do 1 minute. And if we do 1S, that will be 1 second. So we just want to ensure that our material dissolves. So let's put a 30-minute hold. And again, we're still only capturing an image every 60 seconds. Next, I want to cool down. So this will be my isolation temperature. So typically this will be around 5 degrees C. And I want to go very slow. And this is to ensure that I'm trying to grow crystals rather than nucleate lots of small particles. You'll automatically see it's filled out the duration here. And now I want to capture an image every second to capture the most data about my system. If you want to then isolate the particles at the end, I recommend adding a prompt step with the message end. What this will do is then hold the experiment at 5 degrees C in order for you to come collect the sample and then isolate, avoiding any possibility of the instrument heating up once the experiment ends and potentially dissolving some of your particles. Once we have our program, we can go to Run and Results. Here you'll be able to assign a reactor and then press play on the software. And that will begin the experiment running. Once the experiment begins, we can start looking at how to use our cameras. So particle size, the cameras are used primarily for particle size, distribution, and morphology, and these play an important role in process development. Therefore, accurate data is a necessity. The accurate data is dependent on the accuracy of the detection of the particles by the software and the system. And this is dependent on several factors, including within the camera and its settings. And the primary way of workflow for finding your particles and the right is to first select the right camera magnification. Next is to change the focus. Third is to change the light period. And if the particles still aren't in focus or you have a very dense or dark sample, next you can change the gain in order to affect this. So first you need to select a camera magnification. So this is an example we have of 100 micron spheres in each camera magnification that is offered by Technobis. So from this, we then did the analysis by the AI in order to see which which camera was best suited for these size particles. And we have done this with several different size particles on each magnification, and this can be made available to you on request. So from this, for example, for the 100 microns, 0.5, 1, or 2 would be considered acceptable for an experiment consisting of 100 micron sized particles, where the 4 and the 6 times magnification might be inappropriate. So initially in the settings, you press the in the run and results, there'll be this settings wheel. And from this, you can see the front and back light will be set to automatic, and these should be remained as auto. And then these will change in order to match the lightness of the sample. Gain is set to auto, and this will be changed. This can be changed later, as I'll explain. And focus is always set to 0 at the beginning of every experiment. And that will be set as standard, so you can change that after, but it will always, at the beginning of every experiment, revert to 0. If you make any changes and are unhappy with the result, you can always click defaults, and that will revert it back to the beginning of the experiment settings, or reset, and that will change the settings back to the last time they were changed. So this is an example for this suspension. This is a fairly dense suspension. And these are what the images look like at the beginning of the experiment. So first we can change focus. And this is done through the slider or inputting a value within this box. By going to the positive value of the slider, we move to the front of the vial towards the camera. So you can see here at plus 500, we have these grains of the glass vial itself. As we move into the negative, we go away from the to the back of the vial, away from the camera, and from this we can start to see the crystals appearing in focus. Next would be to change the light duration, and this is called the light period. As standard, this is set as 15 microseconds, and essentially this is how long the light pulse happens when the light is flashing. By increasing this, we can increase the amount of light in the sample. So you can see here going from 15 to 23, we're able to now see the edges of the crystals clearer. And if we go to our higher values, to say 32, we can even see the surfaces of the crystals themselves are lightened. And finally, if those two have still not given you the crystals in focus sufficiently, you can start to change the gain. So the system is designed to start in auto gain, and this is where it will try to minimize as much as possible whilst maintaining light. This is because it's trying to obtain the highest resolution it can. So if we go from auto to manual, we can then set a low value of gain. And what this will do is change the sensitivity of the pixels to any light. So by setting a value of gain here, we can start to see that the image is darker, but the resolution on the crystals is better. So if you have a dark suspension or a highly dense suspension, then you might want to increase the gain in order to make more light available to the pixels. However, this should be there's a caution should be taken with this, as if you go to too high a value of gain, you can see here the image, all the pixels are becoming more saturated, and that means the overall image quality decreases as you increase gain. It should be noted as well, this needs to be done, these steps need to be done at the beginning of every experiment, because once the experiment is completed, they all revert back to default. So it might be worth making a note somewhere of the camera settings used in your experiment in order to then reuse them at a later date. So some comments on the cameras. So these slides are designed to act as an introduction to the settings and what they can do to affect your images, but ultimately every sample is different. So you need to play around with these settings in order to find what will work best for your samples. And as I showed during the designing of the experiment, we recommend adding a hold step with a prompt at the beginning so you can change these settings without them affecting at the beginning of your experiment. And these settings can also be changed at any time during the experiment if you see your crystals are not in focus. So next is measuring solubility. So how this is done is during the experiment, once you have got the camera to your liking, the images are analyzed for the number of particles detected in every image that's captured. So this is then plotted as this dark blue line here, and you see number of particles. And then using this information, we can determine when, or get a close approximation of when the last crystals were seen or when the first crystals were seen for clear point and cloud point respectively. So you can see dark blue line here. So as we heat up, the number of particles begins to decrease and then reaches a plateau value. And then as we start to cool down, eventually there is an uptick in the number of particles, and this corresponds with the recrystallization of our material. And then using the software itself, we can then move these pins manually to find where the last crystal was seen for our clear point or solubility, and the first crystals are seen for our cloud point or metastable zone limit. These can then be fitted in the software itself using multi-analysis in order to get the solubility curve. I have an experiment here of copper sulfate in water. So this is the experiment I used. So you can see here I have my hold prompt at the beginning to tune the cameras. For measuring solubility in the crystalline, we recommend using a slower heating rate and cooling rate of 0.1 degrees C per minute. This is due to the larger volumes requiring more time for equilibration than, say, for example, in the Crystal 16, where we're able to operate at a faster cooling rate because the volumes are smaller. So if we go to our analysis tab, and we can see that we have our transition points. By going to the set transition point settings wheel, here we can look at how we define our clear and cloud point based on the analysis. So first we have it ticked as number of particles used to determine our clear and cloud point. And our clear point is defined as when there are 10 particles or less for at least 10 images. For at least 10 images. Here we define our clear point threshold as the number of particles per image being less than 10 for at least 30 seconds. We define our cloud point threshold as the number of particles being greater than 10 for at least 30 seconds. We can then do find all transition points. It will then process the data, giving these values. And then the scientists will be able to move the slider to see the image where the last crystal was seen for solubility. And for our metastable zone, we are looking for the image where the first crystal was seen. In terms of settings for our transitions, we do not recommend to go below or 10 particles per image. This is because there can be impurities or dust or fibers that get into your vial, and these can be triggering as the clear and cloud point occasionally. Once you have done your solubility analysis, you can then combine experiments in the multi-analysis tab. So for this, you create a new multi-analysis. You can input any analysis name, the description, username, and comments. And then you would add the experiments you want to build your solubility and metastable curve with in that you've analyzed in the experiments tab. Once you've done that, you can move to the analysis tab in the solubility line. And here you'll see the data combined So for example, I have 4 experiments here. Then I have my graph combining the 4 data points, 4 experiments together to give me my cloud line, my cloud point curve, my solubility curve, the equations for them, and then the experiment details and data points that go into making those curves. And this can then be exported as either a Word document or a PDF for external use. So finally, we're going to cover the advanced analysis, or AI. So first comment should be noted that processing of the images, so running them through the neural network that we have created, needs to be done on the Omen computer typically provided by Technobis. Once the files have been processed through the Omen computer, they can be opened on any laptop with the advanced analysis license, and that you can analyze them within the particle size evolution software. If you want to run the processing after the experiment or on the version 1 any data you have, you need to disconnect the crystalline from the Omen computer, and then you can process them through the neural network. So we have 3 main detections for our advanced analysis. The first is our AI software. This is good for detecting known shapes that the database has been trained on, and the database will improve over time, and therefore the detection will improve. Next is BLOB, which stands for Binary Large Object, and this is particularly good for fine particles or particles of unknown shape that aren't yet recognized by the AI. And finally, we have hybrid, which is a combination of the two, but gives hierarchy decisions to the AI. So when there's 2 objects both detected by the AI and blob, the AI decision will be taken as the value. So the AI works in real time by taking the images, running them through a pre-processing. This is ensuring that the particles are light enough and detectable. They then get run through the neural network, which is a database of over 5,000 images. That's 1,000 images per crystal habit. The images, the particles are then separated by size and by shape, and then output in their classifications and their metrics. So we have 5 particle shapes included. This is non-convex. So this is particularly like an agglomerate or a jagged particle that has no real defined uniform shape. Next is quasi-equivalent or cubic crystals. We have needle crystals with their high aspect ratio, plates which are thin, and spheres, spherical particles or objects. And then we have 6 metrics which are outputted. So we have particle size, which is the equivalent circle diameter. So the number of pixels making up a detection is then converted to a sphere of the number of pixels with the same, and then we measure the diameter. The contour parameter is the parameter around the outside of the detected particle. The contour area is the area inside that contour. The ellipses shape factor is the aspect ratio. The convex hull parameter is the parameter around the largest external part. So this is not taking into account this indentation here. It draws a straight line around the outside. And the convex hull area is the area inside that convex parameter. And then using that, we can detect objects. So this is an oil and water case, and we can detect our oil droplets as spherical particles. So using the detection and the advanced analysis software, we can then look at analyzing particle size distributions. So this is a cooling seeded crystallization of ascorbic acid in methanol. So initially, we ground up seed material using a pestle and mortar. And then once this material was supersaturated, we added our seeds using the seeding apparatus in the crystalline using the seeding cap. And here you can see the initial particles of the seeds. And then we started to cool down at 0.1 degrees C per minute. So we can start to have some agglomeration occurring, so the crystals are sticking together, but as well some larger particles, so growth is occurring. As we continue the experiment, we get even more larger growth particles, but still some agglomeration. And then at our isolation temperature, we have very large particles, but still some agglomerates happening within the system. And then in the advanced analysis software, we can look at how this particle size distribution changes over time. So at 25 minutes into the experiment, our seeds were added. So you can see our D90 is below 100 microns. After about 20 minutes, we see that there's some growth in the particles, and that's seen by the shift to the right. However, as the experiment continues, the shift continues, but the number of particles actually starts to decrease, and that's seen by this drop in the particle size distribution and this larger tail that exists. And this can be explained by the agglomeration, which we saw from the images. It can also be seen in the D10, D50, and D90. So the difference between the D90 and D10 at the beginning is about 60 microns. However, at the end of the experiment, this is now 100 microns. So that whilst there is growth, the difference between the larger particles and smaller particles has actually increased. So now I'll show you how to analyze the sample within the software. So the advanced analysis can be done within the particle size evolution graph section. So from here, we can see this is our experiment at the top. And for this experiment, we are monitoring a polymorphic transformation of carbamazepine going from form 2 needles to form 3, which is the thermodynamic polymorph, in blocks. So I've already done some processing in this experiment. So what we can do is, if we right-click at the top of in our graph, we can add time selection. You'll see now there's this line here in blue, and this image is also colored. So this image is incorporated into this data set. We can then click and drag to our left and to our right, and you'll see the graph on the left here will move as I go back and forth, incorporating more images into my data set. The scientist then goes into the highlighted area and looks for the images to determine which method is best for their system. So we have our blob, which in this case is picking up a load of particles. It is also picking them up as platelets, which I don't agree with, as well as a sphere. The hybrid, which is also picking up these particles as platelets, which is probably a leftover detection from the blob. And then we have our AI pure, which is only detecting needles and cubic crystals, which is what we're interested in. So once you do all your analysis, the data is projected in the graph on the right. And if we click this, it will become larger. We can then click on and off data in order to show how this changes over the course of the experiment. So initially, there looks like nothing's really happened. There's no real changes in particle size distribution, even though we know that there's a change in morphology. What we can do is go into shape filter, and we can deselect all our categories apart from our needles. And you'll see here that there's actually a pronounced decrease in the number of needle particles being observed. If I take that same data, and I now only want to see my quasi-equivalent crystals or cubic, I can now see the conversion happen in real time. So initially, we have the beginnings of when our cubic particles began to appear, the further conversion of them, and then they start to grow or agglomerate. So we start to see this shoulder, so it's shifting to the right of larger particles. And then this continues throughout the experiment, so we get further growth of the cubic particles. And this actually corresponds with what we're seeing in the images. So we have our pure population of needles at the beginning, and then by the end, we have a mixture of cubic and quite large cubic crystals, as well as needles. So this brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you for your time, and we're happy to take any questions at this moment.